All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get the panel started as people are starting to come back into the room. But really excited to have our second panel that's going to focus on a theme that was struck in our recent report that we had done through Grid Strategies that focuses on the benefits of collaboration. And this is going to pick up on that theme and explore it a little bit further. The focus of this panel is on, the title of the panel, I should say, is on Let's Talk, the Importance of Collaboration in Transmission Planning. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce the moderator for our panel and then let her go ahead and introduce the different panelists for today. So we're really pleased to have Becky Webb, the Senior Manager of Transmission Strategy at Exelon, moderating today's panel discussion. Becky, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce the panelists and get us started.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Larry. Good morning, everyone. So we have quite a diverse panel here for us today to talk about this value of collaboration. And so I'll allow our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll go ahead and start with Brian.
Good morning. I think we're still morning. Brian Tulloh, Executive Director of External Affairs for MISO's North Region, which means I cover the states of Minnesota, Iowa, the Dakotas, both of them, Montana and Manitoba, and work with both the regulators and the member utilities, some of whom are in the room today, in that area up there. My background is I've been in energy for about 40 years, oil and gas deregulation, McKinsey and Company, consulting in their energy practice, and then running through the whole Texas experiment. So right before they went live with their experiment in retail competition that they went through back in 1999, 2000 or so. And that. So I've seen the industry sort of strip free of all the regulatory things that we deal with now in many ways and like that. So I'll bring that perspective. Obviously, coming to an RTO and being based in Minneapolis is a lot different than being down in Texas. But I really have enjoyed my time at the RTO. And really appreciate the importance of the collaboration, because that's really the only way that we as an independent nonprofit are going to be able to do what we need to do also.
Me. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ellis, Great River Energy. It's great to be here. What a great event, great panels so far. This is a tough act to follow. I'm from Great River Energy, and I know that's probably not a household name for many of you, so I'll give you the obligatory boilerplate. We are a generation and transmission cooperative. Together with 27 member-owner distribution cooperatives, we serve about 2/3 of the state of Minnesota, but only about 20% of the load. So what that means, we're very rural, we're quite dispersed. We're also founding member of a group called Grid North Partners, which is an evolution, or it's the new name of a group formerly known as CapEx 2020. We're gonna talk about collaboration. I guarantee I'll talk about them today. This is a group of 10, it's a voluntary partnership, 10 Minnesota surrounding area transmission owning utilities. We've been working together now for almost 2 decades. Pretty simple mission. We had a vision that we could more effectively expand the grid if we worked together than individually. I just want to make it clear that in my comments, I will guarantee I'll talk about Grid North Partners, but I'm here today on behalf of GRE and not on behalf of the greater Grid North Partners. I'm coming at this today from a transmission owner's perspective. And when Larry asked me to talk about collaboration, I thought, wow, this is motherhood and apple pie. When you think about it, transmission, I always say it's a team sport. And it takes everyone working together in order to achieve our goals, right? That's utilities, RTOs, regulators, policymakers. And I'll say most importantly, it's people. It's the communities that we serve. And while it's a team sport, though, it's also a competitive sport. And I think the most interesting dynamic is the same people that we're collaborating with, we're also competing against at the same time. And I think that's a dynamic that only this room would really understand. And despite that, I think we've had some past successes that I'm looking forward to sharing during this panel.
Yep. Hi, all. Happy to be here as well, and appreciate being able to speak on collaboration. I am with Grid Strategies. We are a power sector consulting firm. We focus on the bulk power system, power markets, and we spend a lot of time on transmission as well. The Grid Strategies was founded about 6 years ago by Rob Gramlich, and so unfortunately he couldn't be here today, so you all are stuck with me, unfortunately. Yeah, so as a part of our work, we're interested in any and all ideas that help promote the expansion of the transmission system. We see it as critical for providing reliable and affordable energy to customers, consumers, ratepayers, as well as the helping facilitate decarbonization. We worked on the report that Larry mentioned on collaborative transmission planning, so I'll be talking a little bit about that today, but the real show is done by these two here, so I'll let them provide a lot of the details, but happy to share some of the high-level themes and things that we found from kind of case studies across the country.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Zach. I think, since this is centered around the report that you did, and I think one thing that's really interesting, and certainly we've heard, again, transmission development is certainly a key element in achieving clean energy goals, as well as addressing all of these evolving threats to the system to maintain reliability, enhance the resiliency of the system. So one of the things I noticed in your report, which by the way is available on the Grid Strategies website, or WIRE's website as well. One thing I noticed in your report, you mentioned that collaboration is rarely identified in engineering economics analysis, and is more of an institutional analysis. Can you walk us through just an overview of the report and the analysis that you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Grid Strategies, we're not engineers. We're mostly economists and policy people, and particularly within public policy, one of the things that you often look at it as a part of that field is the incentives, the institutional incentives that exist. And so there's been a lot of other things written on transmission planning and the best practices and things like that. But collaboration was one of the things that we felt hadn't necessarily been highlighted previously, and so that was something we wanted to focus on. I can give a quick overview of the report, and I guess before I start, I should say thank you to a lot of people in this room. We relied on your expertise and experience to provide some of the case studies and through interviews, so really appreciate anyone who helped out with the report. The report, it really boils down to like two simple things, essentially. Collaboration is a key component of transmission expansion. It's a through line through a lot of the successful examples that we reviewed. And then also, as you noted, there's a need to build more transmission, and that's like critical for, increasing load growth and things like that. And so we wanted to show that, there are successful examples of transmission expansion that have happened historically. And so this is something that we've done in the past and can do in the future as well. For our report with collaboration, we did define it pretty broadly. We said that it's really just any sort of company or entity working together on any sort of aspect of building a transmission line. This usually involves significant amounts of information sharing, and generally the relevant parties were people who own, maintain, or plan the transmission system, but it can include other entities as necessary. For the report, we kind of divided it into three components. There's kind of like a historical national energy policy component, a case study component where we looked at about 30 examples of successful transmission expansion, and then best practice or like results from interviews and from experts across the industry and kind of their experience with transmission planning pre-Order 1000 and also after Order 1000. So within that context, we found looking at like historic policy that there's been consistently this drive to improve coordination and collaboration among utilities. That goes all the way back to like the Federal Power Act of 1935. There's been a variety of reasons. For example, in the 1940s, there was a real focus on national security and making sure that there were integrated utility systems to maintain electricity supply, to make sure that like defense production wasn't interrupted. In the 1960s, there was there were two major blackouts that really increase that focus on regional integration. In the 1970s, we saw large load growth. That also led to a lot of collaboration. And then more recently, over the past 20 to 30 years, a lot of FERC's major orders, Order 888, Order 890, Order 2000, have all kind of worked to develop this consensus of collaboration around transmission planning. So it's within that context that we kind of looked at these examples of successful large-scale transmission build-out. Those examples kind of were across many different types of business partnerships. It could be a group of utilities working together. It could be within the RTO, ISO context. It may have been an independent developer with a utility. And these examples are across the country. So this has been done all over and for decades. From those examples, we kind of found four main themes. The first is, as I've said, robust information sharing. So when you're working collaboratively on an integrated system, no one entity has all that information. And so it's critical that everyone involved shares the pieces of information that are needed for a successful plan. We found that there's like a long list of information that needs to be shared. It can be as simple as, generation information or what types of like transmission towers or conductors are used. But it's also more localized knowledge, like, previous interactions with landowners or like historic experience with different communities, like potentially easements that aren't being used. That sort of information is critical. Voluntary collaboration was also a big part of this. All of the collaboration people came into it looking for, they might have had different needs or benefits, but they all realized that increased collaboration and power sharing was able to meet those needs collectively. Shared cost allocation and recovery is also a critical component of this. Obviously, who pays for a line is one of the hardest parts about developing transmission. And so having participants willingly work on that cost allocation and often agreeing to it up front is really important. Within the RTO context, having state participation was very important. Outside of RTOs, having a utility that could go to a commission and seek cost recovery, that was often critical to its success. And then there's also things like for munis and co-ops owning the parts of the transmission lines or plans to help offset customer costs, like that incentive is also pretty critical. So from those themes, we also found that there's a lot of benefits to this collaboration. It allows for transmission plans to address multiple needs. It allows planners to receive higher quality information, which leads to better plans. It allows for the better use of existing assets and right-of-ways, improved outage coordination during construction, greater ability to adopt like new technologies and share best practices across utilities. And then, also the faster development of that infrastructure, usually because you're able to implement or use existing assets or right-of-ways. So despite like these benefits of collaboration, we also found that there was quite a few barriers that have been put in place, maybe unintentionally, to this collaborative transmission planning. It kind of really centered around like the development of the competitive context within Order 1000. As Commissioner Christie said, transmission is still a natural monopoly. It's still regulated. There's still significant economies of scale that you get from large-scale transmission expansion. And so that competitive process has led to like disincentives to share information. A utility may feel that, their proprietary information that they have, they don't want to share that because it could be a competitive advantage within a solicitation process. RTOs and ISOs may not want to communicate with utilities because they don't want to be seen as providing a competitive advantage within that process. RTOs are also kind of in a weird situation sometimes where they also have like a quasi-regulatory role. And when you start to have those like regulatory roles, there's like different restrictions on communication, information sharing, like ex parte at FERC that kind of crop up. And that's a barrier to collaboration as well. there's probably a lot more I could say, but I think that's probably a good place to leave it. And
Yeah.
we can get into more details for the
That's
questions.
great. I think that sets a really nice stage for us. And it really gets to the point about Matt's comment about it really being a team sport, so to speak, that you need information from all these different parties to really have an effective, efficient, holistic solution to the transmission system. So why don't we turn to Brian and Matt? Can you go ahead and describe for us, given your perspectives, what your organization's planning processes are, particularly where those points of collaboration lie?
Sure. I should step back a minute, though, and talk about how we have approached this over time and how the changes that we have had coming in. I think the premise of what MISO does is try to make the grid more reliable. So reliability, affordability, second, and then helping the states achieve their very differing state policies. So we're not a policymaker; we're an independent entity, but we do have some authority and a role in helping bring everybody together. Matt's description of this as a team sport is exactly right. I think he probably stole that from Claire Moeller.
I did.
Who's our president, and he is very good at that. The thing that comes to me every time I think about planning is that's just one of the horizons we have to work in. And the reason you have an RTO is fundamentally to facilitate collaboration. I mean, that's the only way this all works, as is not RTO, if we are facilitating that collaboration. So we try to do that, but it's a complex mix of folks out there that we have to get to collaborate, right? So I've got 15 different states. They all have different policies. They all have different objectives. They all have different criteria that they approach with. Roughly 200 different transmission owners that we knit together. From a transmission planning standpoint, what I like about that setup is whatever happens in the transmission planning world is something we're going to have to deal with in real time. In other words, MISO has to operate on multiple horizons and make sure that they all work together and end up in a reliable state. So think in terms of this conference is about long-range transmission planning. That's the longest term time horizon. We've also got folks that are sitting in a control room right now, making sure that everything is being coordinated and working together. So, and then we've got other folks that are working on setting up the market rules that will encourage that to work efficiently going forward. And there's big changes going on there as we look at how we're going to accredit this new crop of resources coming in. So massive change around the way that we accredit resources with the influx of intermittent, not dispatchable resources that we've got coming in. It's completely going to change the history and the kind of where we're coming from on this. So it is it's quite a challenge. It doesn't go any place without the collaboration. And I think we've got some good examples of it that I'll go into later.
That's great. Yeah, I just want to build upon that. So Great River Energy, we're a cooperative, and it sounds super corny and cliched, but that's really ingrained in our culture, that collaborative spirit. Internally, and if I can just make some linkages to the panel before, that was such a great panel. Internally, the way we're organized, we found a lot of benefits, to use Carlo's line of locking the different planning functions in a single room. And so we are organized where it's not reliability planning and economic planning and strategic planning, it's planning. And that's bringing everyone together, and we really see the benefits of that. Externally, we are an active participant, as Brian can attest, in the MISO planning process. We're also, one of those ingrained silos that we talked about, with the integrated planning is just organization. We're a G&T cooperative. And so we have 27 different distribution cooperatives. And the only way to solve that gap is through collaboration. And it's not a homogeneous group. And so it takes a lot of work and a lot of our effort on our part to work with each of those 27 different distribution cooperatives to understand their needs, their changes, their priorities, and so that we can make those work. Additionally, something very unique, I think, just to Minnesota in general is we've got another group that I'm going to call it kind of a sub-regional. It fits between MISO and between our local, which is this Grid North Partners. Again, 10 Minnesota surrounding area utilities, diverse group. It's IOUs, it's munis, it's co-ops. And it might just be because of our integrated system, but this is a group that was really formed pre-MISO and very revolutionary at the time. Okay, let's get together and let's plan our systems together. And even though MISO has come along and they've taken that model and just put it on steroids, we still find a lot of value in having, say, a Minnesota-centric group that's getting together and planning. I described those in 3 separate buckets. And I think, again, in the spirit of integration, what we try to do is bring all 3 of those together. And while there's not a lot of plans that, say, fit smack in the middle of the Venn diagram, just understanding the direction on each of those helps us develop a better composite plan.
Very good. So I think you both have highlighted various collaborative points in your process. What value have you seen collaboration bring to the transmission development? And in particular, how has that led to successful development of transmission on the system?
Yeah, I'm going to start. There's 2 ways that it comes in. Because planning processes in MISO really come from 2 different directions. There's sort of a bottoms-up planning process where we collect the collective plans of all of our 200 members or so that are because they own the system. MISO has no authority to require somebody to build something or build a transmission line or a power plant. We don't have any of that. But there is there's a regular annual planning process where we roll up the collective ideas that the member transmission owners have and make sure that it fits together. So it's the bottom-up process happens every year. These are age and age-related, just maintenance type stuff to load additions where they're connecting new loads, load growth, other things like that. Most of it is just to maintain the reliability of the system, incremental changes. So a little bit, a big bucket of smaller projects. We're seeing those collective plans rise rapidly over time. I mean, those used to run in the $2 to $3 billion a year range across the MISO footprint. This last one was up to, I believe, $8 billion across the entire footprint of just these bottoms-up transmission owner nominated plans. So then on top of that, we have a separate regional planning approach. And this is very different than the bottoms-up approach, which tends to be a little small things. So this is a lot of the things that are going to be benefiting the entire region. And the key to that is it was mentioned earlier, is cost allocation. In other words, when you're looking at the entire MISO grid, which is very spread apart, very kind of in the middle of the Eastern Interconnect with neighbors on both sides and all directions, as Sean Schucker said today, his experience, he's sort of right in the middle there in Missouri. So he's got that but you've got neighbors on all sides, and how you interact with those neighbors is just vitally important. So from a planning process, when we start to think about the big regional lines, probably the best example of that was the 2010-2011 MVP, multi-value project portfolio that was put together. So back in that time period, there was a collection of upper Northwest states. MISO didn't have a southern part then. Upper Northwest, Midwest states that all had state RPS requirements, right? They and a lot of wind was being added in those northern states, and you could kind of add up the collective state statutes around the RPSs and see that everybody, to get there, you need to add this much, and there was clearly going to needed to be some transmission changes made, and that was kind of the premise behind the first multi-value project portfolio that was done back in 2010. That was not huge. It was huge at the time, but it was $6 to $7 billion, I believe, in the Upper Midwest. The cost allocation was the hardest part of that to work out because we had to work it out where that was spread across the entire northern part of the MISO footprint. So on a dollar per megawatt hour basis, postage stamp basis, and like that. So the portfolio had to benefit everybody, and these were regional benefits, and that's what we had to prove. And that process worked very well. And Grid North Partners was a big part of that, as a big subset of that. Kind of is how I think of the Grid North Partners effort. So that planning process was historic at the time. I think we've now tried to, as the fleet transition comes to us, we've started to use that same MVP tariff with some modifications to bifurcate it for the north and south to do our long-range transmission planning effort, Tranche 1 and Tranche 2. Right now we're in. That effort is, so in 2022, we approved about $10 billion worth of regional lines in the Midwest, those costs allocated across the Midwest. Those projects are now in the state process and moving forward very quickly. We're already going on Tranche 2, which is another set of projects. We recently, just in the last month, published a new indicative map of where we think we're going. Still a lot of work to be done, but we see that, and that portfolio will probably be as much as $20 billion to do that. And early on in this process, when we were trying to set people up for how big this could be, we put some numbers out there about how much it would actually take to achieve the decarbonization goals that some states have. And our initial estimates from a transmission standpoint was it could be $100 billion of transmission across the entire MISO footprint to enable the $400 or $500 billion of generation that was needed to meet that meet those carbon objectives. So we sort of put a marker out there that this was going to be a lot more transmission than you've ever conceived needed. This was just a very different situation. So we've tried to chip away at that with Tranche 1. Tranche 1 was kind of the no regret stuff. Tranche 2 is getting more into the building the backbone, and the backbone is a switch, or not a switch to, but an addition of some 765 kV lines. There'll be more trunk lines in key areas, and that is where we're spending a lot of time right now, and have sort of a lot of collaboration going on too.
And I think as part of your process, so at the various points, you're looking at getting feedback from the various MISO stakeholders along the way. You're looking at the public policies coming in from the various states. So I think where MISO is going in terms of that scenario planning is really interesting and helping to drive some of those holistic solutions.
Yeah, our last workshop had 450 people attending, virtually. I mean, it was a 5-hour workshop walking through this new map, and then we break down into sub-regional groups. But there's just so much interaction that is required to get this to work out. The other clarism that
I won't steal it.
is that it's not always the solution. It's not always the best technical solution. Perfect technical solution is not the objective. It's the solution that the transmission solution that gets the most people to agree to that, and that is driven by mainly the cost allocation because everyone's paying for it. So it's got to work for everybody, and it's got to be a broad portfolio of projects that come in. It's not a single line at all. It's a broad portfolio that touches the entire footprint.
Very good. And Matt, how about your experience? Where have you seen collaboration help drive successful transmission development?
Yeah, and since Brian, gave he gave a regional, which was a great example, and we very much applaud MISO's work with the LRTP and with the MVP portfolio. But maybe I'll go the opposite end of the spectrum, just to provide a little diversity up here. Typically we think of collaboration, and I think even the way when everyone came in here, you're thinking about collaboration is needed for these really big projects. Right, that's what's on our mind right now. We're thinking 765 multi-state, but I'd say collaboration is also needed for the really small projects. And we've got a very recent example with Grid North Partners. We made an announcement at the end of last year that we're constructing 19 projects in order to address congestion in the near term. And so just quick background. So in Minnesota, especially the last 3 years, congestion trends sharply on the rise. And I could spend an hour panel talking about why that's happening, but just in general, generation development is outpacing transmission development in the state. While the long-range transmission plan projects, that tranche one that Brian spoke about, while that's the solution to the congestion and it will address it, those aren't going to be in service until 2030 timeframe. And so as utilities, we're left, all right, do you keep taking rising energy costs, waiting for these lines, or do you do something about it? And so we had this built-in partnership, this collaboration. Great River Energy wasn't facing this issue alone. So were our neighboring utilities, Xcel Energy, Minnesota Power, the whole Grid North Partners utilities. And so collaboratively, we got together and tried to figure out how do we address rising congestion in the near term. And so we got the planners together from all 10 shops. We gave them a different objective function, told them don't solve congestion. We know how you're going to do that, but solve as much congestion as you possibly can in 2 years. It's got to be in service within 2 years. And again, the result of this was these 19 projects. Total costs around $100 million. I'll say that there's 2 projects in there that take up almost the whole price tag. Most of these are incredibly small little projects. And here's what collaboration enabled. One, it's the combined strength, right? If you can get 10 different utilities planners, 10 different groups of engineers marching in the same direction, it is a beautiful thing. It doesn't happen very often, but we struck, gold with this one, and it worked. The other thing, and I'd say it's more importantly, is it allowed the benefits of those projects to really grow exponentially. If you look at any one of these 19 projects by themselves, they're yawn-worthy. They're unremarkable. They're incredibly small. This is $1 million or $2 million project. Even the benefits of that project by itself is hardly anything. But you put them all together, and all of a sudden now you've got a big bite into congestion. If there's any engineers, if anyone's ever tried to solve congestion incrementally, you get the daisy chain issue. You solve one issue and it just squeezes down to the next one. You solve that one and it squeezes down the next. So by all of us doing this together, a whole bunch of different service territories, you can proactively address that daisy chain issue. The last one, and I'll say probably the most importantly, we've heard this theme. What's the key to this? Cost allocation. Who pays for these? These projects are super small projects. $1 million or $2 million. They don't qualify for any sort of cost allocation under MISO. And so each utility has to pay their own way for these. Now, if it's a congestion relief project, as we've heard this morning, as a utility, as Great River Energy, we need to have enough savings to Great River Energy in order to justify the cost of us paying for that project. What oftentimes happens with these congestion projects is it's not necessarily us that's benefiting from a project in our footprint, it's our downstream neighbor, right? And so on and so forth. So without all of us getting together on this, that would have never happened because the business case wouldn't have worked out for each individual utility. So yeah, I just think it was a good example, not just the big stuff, which is incredibly important, we need it, but also with these small projects.
Very good. Now, Zach, I think you also mentioned this as well, but as we've seen the planning processes evolve over time, certainly we've seen barriers introduced into the process. Why do you think that is, and what are some of those barriers?
Yeah, I touched on that a little bit in the summary, but I do think from the interviews that we did for the report, there was a pretty clear distinction of collaboration happening before Order 1000 and then the resulting maybe like lack of collaboration after Order 1000. It's not true in all regions. For example, MISO and Great River Energy here are good examples post Order 1000 where collaboration is still happening. But kind of that introduction of the competitive context into transmission really created some of these barriers. So you have, transmission owners who often have the most knowledge of the system, not necessarily being able to share information with the RTO or ISO. So individually, ISO New England and PJM and SPP all said that, when something was identified, and a competitive solicitation began, they often had to stop communication with the transmission owner that would be impacted by the project. And so that's a barrier. That introduction as well led to the disincentive of not wanting to share information because of the competitive advantage it provides. There's a lot of proprietary information that transmission owners have, and there's not a need to necessarily share that out. Outside of the RTO ISO context, there are concerns that someone could do a lot of work and planning and development and get pretty far in the development of a project, and it may just end up getting co-opted. And so that's also another barrier to collaboration of not wanting to have that project get turned over to someone else. So there are a variety of barriers, but I would say one of the biggest ones is just the lack of information sharing and restrictions on communication that really prevent planners from having the best information and developing these multi-value plans that work and provide benefits across the system to everyone involved.
Certainly each holds a very those nuggets of information that are very critical in helping understand the big picture. So I guess, Brian, what have you seen in MISO's process or just generally over your career similar to those barriers? Where have you seen those pop up in those processes?
Well, again, it goes back to cost allocation. That is the big hurdle to get over, and then just the complexity too. The challenge is we're trying to rebuild this airplane while it's flying, and it's that. So I would say the biggest challenge with that is this fleet transition that's going on at the same time, and starting to get the market signals out in the market for those other horizons that I mentioned MISO having to work in before, in those shorter term time horizons. We have to get transmission planning right because we have to sort of eat our own cooking when it gets to real time, right? Because if we can't make it work, then reliability will be a problem, and we will fail. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, cost allocation is always very critical, and certainly it leads in that development and identification of what the solution is and what is a viable solution, and whether or not siting and permitting can even be achieved under that construct. So Matt, how about you? What have you seen change in the industry or in the processes, and any potential barriers that pop up?
So I'll try to build on some of the comments from Zach and Brian. So as Zach mentioned, so Great River, we're a MISO member, so it's a developer selection, not a sponsorship model. So we don't have some of those issues. We also operate in Minnesota, which is a ROFR state, and so some of those direct impacts of say Order 1000 we're a bit more immune to. With that said, to me and just from our perspective, one of the biggest things that Order 1000 did is it cemented a mindset that everything that we do as transmission owners is proprietary. And that's not just in the planning realm, but just in how we engage the public and how we procure, how we design, how we ultimately construct and development, right? There's a mindset there that there's like an internal force saying, okay, keep this close to the chest right now. And so I think just as a result, what we've seen is even in a state like Minnesota with a successful history and relationships around collaboration, it's harder to arrive at a plan. And I think, maybe some of that is this mindset from Order 1000, but some of this also I just think is just due to, technology and these bigger projects and how those are happening. When we think of these big regional projects, there's multiple benefits to them. There's a regional benefit, right? And when MISO is designing these, they're really truly trying to optimize it for the entire footprint's needs. At the same time as each utility, we're trying to be as efficient as possible, right? We want that regional project to also address our local issues, right? Delay an age and condition project, help set up future load growth, right? There's strategic advantages to those. And so yes, you want the optimal regional project, but at the same time, you want a project that works great for you locally and helps, to kill two birds with one stone. And one of the things, that we're starting to see is as these lines get longer, and especially as we start seeing these voltages get much higher, there's less physical means to say spread the wealth between those people in between. And so I think, what we're seeing is, I don't think collaboration is broken down by any means, but you're seeing it. It's much more hard. There's inefficiencies to try to arrive at that plan.
Great points. Great points. I know we've seen it's been much more difficult to talk to your neighbors overall, just to say, hey, what are you seeing? Here's what we're seeing. What makes sense, as opposed to just being very siloed in the needs on the system overall. That's great. So, with these barriers, what solutions do you see, especially with so many dynamics changing on the system, new technologies being introduced, new resources, retiring resources? What are some solutions to help remove some of those barriers to collaboration or some of those hesitations with sharing that critical knowledge?
I could jump in.
We'll let you. I know you've done some research on
Yeah.
this. So.
Well, I will say that the report is very much highlighting, barriers to collaboration and the benefits as well, but maybe doesn't go as deeply into the potential solutions. There's certainly an opportunity at FERC with the upcoming transmission planning rule to kind of realign the incentives around collaboration, or even explicitly encourage collaboration. Like that said, encouraging collaboration doesn't necessarily guarantee it's going to happen. And so making sure that those incentives around information sharing, around perceptions of competitive advantage, that those are addressed, it is important. I also think new technologies that are coming online can be helpful in terms of adding to collaboration. I mean, or even just it's something where other utilities can learn from each other. I mean, there's HVDC, there's high performance conductors, grid enhancing technologies. These all can help with the cost allocation question. They may be able to lower the costs. They won't necessarily avoid, new investment, but may provide some of that political or help politically with lower overall total costs of the plan.
Okay. And Matt, I guess, leading off of your comments earlier, so if you could wave a magic wand, what would you consider to be an ideal planning process?
Ooh, I wish I had that wand. I think so. First things first, I don't think any of the processes are broken. I think truly, MISO does a great job bringing everyone together. Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, they've got a lot of focus right now around streamlining their process. But at the end of the day, they do a great job bringing together all the impacted parties. But I think there's always opportunities to streamline it and to improve it, and especially try to improve collaboration. And if you try to think about, what is collaboration and what's the key ingredient, to me, it's trust, right? You truly have to trust the people that you are collaborating with and working with, that they're not going to, backstab you or try to come around you. It's classic game theory on a lot of that. And so, if you're trying to improve trust, to me, one of the biggest things, anytime you're going to work together, you got to have common objectives, clear objectives, right? And so you go into a transmission plan, what does everyone say? Hey, we want to maintain reliability at the lowest cost. We heard it this morning, right? Every single person is going to raise their hand and say, yes, I want that. But in the background, everyone else has got all these other sub-objectives, right? There's strategic objectives, there's financial objectives. And the more that we can get those out there, the better you can collaborate together and find out, okay, where are these common out? Where do we have differences and work through it? Again, this is very altruistic. I fully recognize that. Second, I think with that, then you have clear decision making and very transparency. Brian talked about how transmission plan, right? It's not just about the best technical plan. It's about the plan that everyone supports, that works with everyone. And everyone that's been around this, and don't get me wrong, we support this process. You understand it's part art, part science. But being able to be more transparent on how that decision was made only helps. The last one, and I probably should have mentioned, this panel is really all about transmission planning. And it's about collaboration to the plan. But to me, success of a project isn't when the plan is identified. I'll even say it's not even when it was energized. But it's got to be a continuum, right? We think about this need for additional transmission. It's going to keep going on for some time. So we've got to be building bridges with each other within our local communities. And so I think, one of the biggest opportunities then is collaboration on the execution side of things. Sharing intel on what worked best from an engagement. If you understand different local communities, sharing, okay, here's their specific concerns. I know as a cooperative, we've got a very unique insight into some of those concerns, even though we're not developing, say, all the transmission through there. Additionally, you can get even bigger picture. Resources, they're scarce. We were talking earlier at breakfast about lead times. We think about construction crews. And as we look ahead, there's going to be less and less of those. So to the extent that utilities can collaborate more to fill the valleys, to sequence projects, it's probably better for the entire industry to get where we need to go.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll add in another, I agree with all that. But I'll add in another element that's very important from our perspective, and that's working with the collective state regulators throughout our footprint. That is really the key to getting anything done. Obviously, they're the rate regulators that are determining which investments actually go forward. They'll ultimately approve all these transmission lines within their state and have siting authority and things like that. But that relationship from the top down with the organization of MISO states, so 15 different states, is absolutely critical, because we can't move forward if we don't have that. I won't say can't. I guess we could, but it would be a very difficult road to go down as an independent RTO without the support at FERC of the organization of MISO states. So all these discussions become a early stage sort of group around what do the states need. And you look at our states, and they're, again, a very diverse set of, first of all, public policy objectives. We've got about 3 states that have statutory decarbonization goals. We've got a bunch of other states that are on the other end of the spectrum, and they have an all-of-the-above energy strategy. I was in Bismarck Monday talking to the folks in North Dakota, and they're in a constant feud with folks in Minnesota who have a policy objective to do one thing. North Dakota is a lot like Texas, where I came from, which is we're just trying to be all fuels are good, so we just want to produce and export. So working those things out with the regulators so that they can each have their needs met, whether they be economic development, growth. They all agree on reliability. They all agree on affordability, but they differ around state policies. So when we bring together our business case for like tranche 1, for the first tranche of LRTP projects that we had to demonstrate the benefits far exceeded the cost. It was about a 3-to-1 ratio of the benefits to cost. That was fairly straightforward there. But when we take that business case to North Dakota, I have to back out the decarbonization part of those numbers. And it's still a strong business case. It's maybe 2.5 to 1 benefits to cost ratio. But you've got to do things like that to keep them engaged and involved in the process, because there's no way this works without having those states with the really rich resources for wind that can be tied in now can work.
Great point.
Like, there we go. So we just have time for like one or maybe two questions. I thought we'd pivot to that if that's okay. I'll let Jody kick it off, and then if anybody has one more question, we can do a follow-up on that. All right, we got one down there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Really interesting discussion this morning. I think I heard you all say, at least to a degree, and correct me if I'm wrong, that effective collaboration, which we need, will be difficult to impossible to really effectuate in the Order 1000 competitive solicitation construct. And if that's the case, and it's also unlikely that FERC is going to fully reinstate or maybe even conditionally reinstate the ROFR, what do you see as the next steps, or where do you see as the disconnect there? You know, there's agreement that we need effective collaboration. There's agreement, well, at least I heard agreement amongst the three of you, and others agree as well, that competitive solicitation processes can and are impeding that effective collaboration. Yet FERC seems stuck on doing what at least we as wires believe needs to be done. So what are your thoughts on that disconnect, and how we might move forward with FERC and with states and otherwise?
You want?
I can take a first shot at it. I will say that within the report, there are examples where there is successful collaboration in the competitive solicitation context. And like New York Transco, for example, has won competitive solicitations. It's a joint utility venture. And they were able to, the projects used existing rights of way as well. So that speeds up the process and saves money in the long term. So it's not completely impossible within the competitive solicitation process. I will also say that I think to some extent there is also like the part about trust and like the culture that exists in some regions. It seems pretty clear that there are areas there's not necessarily any specific policies in place that are preventing information sharing, but there does seem to be like a breakdown in trust in a way, and so working to like redevelop that, and it can be a part of that as well.
Yeah, we have to take that as a given. It's the law of the land, so we do that, and it's difficult to deal with at sometimes, but it is what it is. MISO's perspective, it's the certainty that's actually more important than whether it's Order 1000. In other words, we've got a variety of states. Some have ROFRs, others don't. Others are, we can deal with either one, but when they, change at the last minute or right before you're going down the path, it implies a different path in our process too. In the best case, it would just add time, if not money.
And I don't think I can give we're quite isolated. We're in MISO, so developer selection. We're in Minnesota, which is a ROFR state, so we don't see some of those direct. And that's not really the answer I think that you were looking for. But I would say there's always opportunities for voluntary partner, and that's way easier said than done. I think even as Grid North Partners or CAPA, we've had 2 decades, and could we form today? This formed pre-MISO, pre-Order 1000. If we had to do it again today, would we be able to form? I don't know, but I'd say what's kept the group together has not been necessarily the hard stuff. It's just the soft stuff. It's those relationships. It's those ties. And so I think that's so key. It's just those being able to just keep talking and keep building that up.
Can I jump in one more on the point of time? Like, competitive solicitations can really delay the start of a process, and so that is something where, you know, not having that in place can provide significant benefits. Delaying the start of tranche 1 by a year or 2 with competitive solicitations would delay those benefits to customers. We're also in a situation where we need to build transmission now, and so we need to have been planning, you know, 5 years ago, and we need to have already been building as well.
Blake Fletcher, Burns and McDonnell in Kansas City. My question today was, Brian, for you, listening to the LRTP workshop on Friday, March 15th, I believe, it's when I first heard the phrase Tranche 2A. And I was just curious if you're able to comment on whether that tranche, if that comes to be, would cut in line in front of Tranche 3 with MISO South, Tranche 4 with the North-South interface limit, or if that would essentially become like a Tranche 5. Are you able to comment on that?
I see that. I think what we're recognizing there is that there's more to do in the north part of MISO than is reflected even in the roughly $20 billion portfolio that we've rolled out. So timing on that, and frankly, just the idea of consuming a portfolio that was dramatically bigger than that. You know, let's just say for round numbers that the need for the upper Midwest is in the $40 billion range, and we're taking a $20 billion bite out of that $50 billion with this. Were we to try to do the whole $40 billion of transmission up front, we think it would have probably overwhelmed itself. It just would have been way too much. So we've kind of broken it out a little bit. I fully believe there will be a Tranche 2, Part 2. We believe that. Timing of that, I think it would, you know, we would continue to work with the same models and things like that we have for Tranche 1, or for the first Tranche 2, and keep moving. So our expectation is that would be just a continuation from the work we're doing now in Tranche 2 going forward. Yeah, we've got a bit of a naming problem there, don't we?
All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to be drawing to a close the Wire Spring meeting for 2024. Join me in thanking our panel on this last discussion about the importance of collaboration. We will have lunch available for folks if you're able to stick around and grab a bite to eat before you head out or go off to do other things in Chicago. And in the meantime, start looking ahead to our summer meeting, which is going to be July 24th and 25th in Boston. So more information to come on that. And thank you all for being here today, and safe travels wherever you're headed.